History often remembers kings and warriors, prime ministers and poets, but hidden in the margins of dusty textbooks are the children, boys and girls who stood taller than their age, defied empires, led revolts, and became legends, all before they reached adulthood. Today, we journey through India's past to meet 10 extraordinary young souls. They came from villages and palaces, forests and farmlands. Some picked up the pen, others the sword, but all left behind a legacy far greater than their years. This is Young Legends of India. We've made every effort to pronounce each name and place correctly, but we sincerely apologize for any mispronunciations. Our goal is to honor each young legend's legacy with the utmost respect. Perva Rani Gidenu. She was just 13 when she defied the British Empire. Born into the Rongmei Naga tribe in Manipur, Rani Gidenu grew up listening to stories, not fairy tales, but stories of resistance. In the early 1930s, colonial rule had pushed her people to the edge. Land was taken, customs were banned, and missionaries tried to erase indigenous identities. Then came Jadanang, a spiritual leader who began preaching a revival of the old Naga ways. Young Gidenu became his most devoted disciple, but when Jadanang was captured and executed by the British, she didn't run, she rose. At 13, Gidenu took up the mantle of leadership. She moved through the forests of northeast India, organizing armed resistance among tribal villagers. With fierce loyalty and spiritual conviction, she led what became known as the Haraka movement, a blend of cultural revival and anti-colonial rebellion. She evaded British forces for nearly 2 years, often trekking through wild terrain barefoot, surviving on little more than faith and determination. But in 1932, at just 16 years old, she was captured and sentenced to life in prison. Even behind bars, her legend grew. Locals began calling her Rani, or Queen. When Jawaharlal Nehru visited her in prison in the 1930s, he was so moved that he vowed to never forget her. After independence, she was finally released in 1947 after spending 15 years in jail. Today, statues and stamps honor her, but it was in the forests of Manipur, with courage as her only shield, that a young girl became one of India's fiercest freedom fighters. 2. Khudiram Bose, 1889 to 1908. He was 16 years old and already ready to die for his country. Born in the village of Habibpur in Bengal, Khudiram Bose wasn't raised in a house of revolutionaries, but the spirit of rebellion burned in him from a young age. He passed out anti-colonial pamphlets at 15, joined a revolutionary group soon after, and believed wholeheartedly that British rule had to end. When he was just 17, Khudiram and fellow revolutionary Prafulla Chaki were chosen to assassinate a British magistrate known for brutal repression. The plan was to throw a bomb at his carriage, but in a twist of fate, they struck the wrong target, killing 2 British women instead. Khudiram fled on foot, running miles through fields and forests. When he was finally caught, he was barefoot, exhausted, and smiling. In court, he showed no fear. He accepted his fate with a calm, steady gaze. His last words were, "Vande Mataram." On the day of his hanging, thousands gathered outside the jail. The British had intended to kill a boy. Instead, they created a martyr. Khudiram Bose was only 18 when he was executed, but his courage and that boyish smile on the scaffold ignited a fire that would burn through the heart of the independence movement. 3. Bersa Munda, 1875 to 1900. He was a boy who became a god in the eyes of his people. Bersa Munda was born in the tribal belt of present-day Jharkhand, at a time when British policies were stealing land and dismantling centuries of indigenous traditions. A child of the forest and fields, Bersa witnessed firsthand how his community was forced into poverty and silence. But by his mid-teens, Bersa began preaching, not just religion, revolution. He called on the Munda people to return to their roots, to cast off the control of missionaries, and to fight for their land. His words turned into a movement, the Ulgulan, or Great Upheaval. Villagers left their jobs, burned colonial records, and took up arms. Bersa became both spiritual leader and military commander, blending faith and fury. He was barely 24 when the British captured him. Just months later, he died mysteriously in jail. No trial, no explanation. But Bersa Munda had already become more than a leader. He was a symbol of resistance for millions of tribal Indians. Even today, he is worshipped as a deity in parts of eastern India, proof that sometimes a single voice can awaken a forgotten people. 4. Baji Rout, 1926 to 1938. He was 12 years old and didn't even carry a weapon. Baji Rout was a boat boy from Odisha, living in a small riverside village during the turbulence of the Quit India movement. In 1938, British soldiers came to his village, demanding passage across the river in pursuit of freedom fighters. They ordered Baji to row them across. He said no. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a protest march, just one word, no. Infuriated, the soldiers opened fire, shooting Baji and his friends point blank. His small body fell into the river, still clutching the oar. He was the youngest martyr of India's freedom struggle, just 12 years old. His village built a memorial, poems were written, songs were sung, and across Odisha, his story is still told of the boy who died not because he was fighting with guns, but because he refused to help the oppressors. Maharaja Dulip Singh, 1838 to 1893. At just 5 years old, he wore a crown heavier than his years. Maharaja Dulip Singh was the last ruler of the Sikh Empire, born into royalty and surrounded by power. But when the British annexed Punjab, they took more than land. They took him. Exiled to England, Dulip was raised in luxury under the watchful eye of Queen Victoria. He learned English manners, dressed in British suits, and was converted to Christianity. But he was a king without a kingdom, a child stripped of identity. As a teenager, he began to ask questions about his mother, about his people, about why his heritage had been erased. In his 20s, he tried to return to India to reclaim his faith and his crown, but the British stopped him at every turn. They feared what his return would ignite. He spent his life torn between two worlds. But in his youth, Dulip Singh became a living symbol of colonial manipulation, a prince turned pawn, and a boy whose royal blood could not protect him from imperial theft. 6. Meera Bai. She gave her heart to a god and never looked back. Meera Bai was born into Rajput royalty, promised in marriage before she could speak of love, but her love was already given to Krishna. From childhood, Meera would sing to her deity, write poetry, and imagine a life of devotion. As she grew older, her spiritual passion grew stronger, even as her family demanded obedience. She refused. When her husband died, Meera chose not to live as a grieving widow, but as a wandering saint. She left the palace, singing bhajans through the villages of Rajasthan, Gujarat, and beyond. Her poetry, filled with longing, rebellion, and divine love, still echoes through Indian temples today. Though still young when she left everything behind, Meera defied every social norm of her time. In a world that tried to silence her, she sang louder. Kamla Sethi, 1912-1998. She was 18 when the doors of India's top science institute slammed in her face. Kamla Sethi had applied to the Indian Institute of Science, but its director, Nobel laureate C.V. Raman, refused her admission. Women have no place in research, he told her. Kamla didn't accept that. She protested, demanded reconsideration, and eventually earned a conditional admission. But she didn't just meet expectations, she exceeded them. In her early 20s, she became the first Indian woman to earn a PhD in science, and even before that, as a teenage student, she had already begun her pioneering work on nutrition and malnutrition, fighting to understand how poverty affects the body, especially in women and children. Her research on palm sap, Meera, helped provide affordable nutrition to the poor. Her legacy isn't just her discoveries, It's the battle she fought to even enter the lab. She didn't pick up a weapon or wave a flag. She stood at the gates of knowledge and refused to be turned away. 8. Lal Bahadur Shastri, 1904 to 1966. Early activism. Before he led a nation, he crossed rivers just to get to school. Lal Bahadur Shastri was born into poverty in Uttar Pradesh. As a boy, he couldn't afford shoes. He swam across the Ganges every day to attend class. Quiet, humble, and fiercely determined, he joined Gandhi's non-cooperation movement at 17 and went to jail. He was still just a student, but already a revolutionary. He didn't shout slogans or make fiery speeches. He just did what was right, over and over again. In his youth, he carried books through storms and ideals through prison walls. The man who would later say, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, began life as a barefoot boy with a spine of steel. 9. Kanaklata Barua, 1924 to 1942. She walked toward death, holding the flag of her country. Kanaklata Barua was only 17 when she led a procession of protesters during the Quit India movement in Assam. With the Indian flag in her hands, she marched toward a British-controlled police station. The officers warned her to stop. She didn't. The gunshots rang out. Kanaklata fell instantly, but the flag never touched the ground. Another young protester picked it up and kept going. Kanaklata didn't live to see independence, but her sacrifice became a rallying cry. In the end, she didn't raise a sword or a slogan, just a flag, and it was enough to shake an empire. Sarojini Naidu, the Nightingale of India, years 1889 to 1898, ages 10 to 19. In 1889, in the princely state of Hyderabad, a young girl named Sarojini Naidu began writing poems that shimmered with emotion and intellect. At just age 10, she was already weaving verses that hinted at her future as a literary force. Her teachers and family were astonished. By age 12, in 1891, she had written a 1,300-line epic poem. In 1895, at just 16 years old, Sarojini earned a scholarship to study in England, first at King's College London, then at Girton College, Cambridge. There, between 1895 and 1898, she absorbed British literary influences while fiercely preserving her Indian identity. She wrote about love, nature, and eventually, freedom, all through the lens of a young Indian woman thousands of miles from home. Her poetry fused the romantic style of the West with the soul of India. By 1898, at just 19, she had become a respected voice, a poet, a thinker, and a symbol of what Indian youth, especially girls, could achieve. Sarojini Naidu would go on to become the first Indian woman to preside over the Indian National Congress, and later, the first female governor of an Indian state. But her legend began much earlier, with ink-stained fingers, a boundless mind, and a spirit that refused to be silenced. These young legends didn't wait for adulthood to make history. They challenged kings, empires, and even fate itself. In every corner of India, their stories still echo in classrooms, temples, rivers, and mountains. They remind us that courage knows no age, and that sometimes the boldest steps forward are taken by the smallest feet. If this inspired you, subscribe to Young Legends for more powerful stories from around the world, because greatness has no age limit.